So I know we're 1 minute past our 5:30 start time. So I'll kick us off with some logistics, and then I'll pass it over to Doug Funke, the president of Citizens for Regional Transit. So Nyawaiskeno, I'm Kriki Kazak. I work on Buffalo Commons, which is the joint collaboration between Cornell, ILR, Buffalo CoLab, and Partnership for the Public Good, of which CRT is a very close partner. I think some of the things that Doug will be covering today have to do with what it is that folks have identified within the region that they see as a really top priority. Transit is something that a lot of people know that we need to do better in. And Doug will talk us through some of the things that CRT is doing and some of the opportunities for people to be involved. So I'm just going to talk you through a few of the things today. So number one, I see some folks have joined us via their cameras or via their phones. If you're having any bandwidth issues, one of the things we encourage you is to close out of anything in the background. For me, it's Outlook. That takes up most of my memory because I have a lot in my inbox. One of the other things that we want to highly encourage all of you to do is to use the chat function. So if you navigate to the bottom of your screen, you should have mute, stop video, chat, and perhaps some other buttons depending on which version of Zoom that you have. Just to test it out, we would love if you do some introductions in the chat. So if you wanted to do your name, if you're joining us from an organization, and maybe one of the big questions or things that you hope to learn from tonight's discussion. One of the other things to say is that Doug will go through his presentation, then I'll pass it over for Hal and Tom to do comments, and then we'll go back to the Q&A. We encourage you to put any questions that you have into the chat, and then we'll be lifting up to our presenters at the end of our conversation. So if during the talk you have a pressing question, just make sure to type it into the chat, and we'll lift it up at the end during the Q&A session. I will be making sure that everyone is muted right now, just because I know sometimes I get background noise throughout the evenings. But if you do have a question, feel free to chat me directly, or there's an option to raise your hand. If you're really Zoom savvy, you're able to do that. If you have any questions for me, you can type them in the chat. Otherwise, I do want to let everyone know that this is being recorded. So if you have any other comments or questions, feel free to type them. Otherwise, I'll pass it over to Doug.
Okay, thanks, Kriki. And I want to thank Partnership for the Public Good for hosting this, and for you, to you for helping us get it through the technology and making this thing actually work. Again, my name is Doug Funke. I'm the president of Citizens Regional Transit. Most of you probably know who we are, but we're a nonprofit, all volunteer transit advocacy organization here in Buffalo, New York. Prior to my time at CRT, I was a research engineer at CalSpan in their transportation research department. I've been the president of Citizens Regional Transit now since 2013. Let me introduce our two guests, and I want to thank both Tom and Hal again. They've been stalwarts whenever we've asked them to come and help us, because our topic is transit usually, and they're the experts here. So they've been at many of these meetings, and I really do appreciate their time and their willingness to come and to help us out. Tom George is the Director of Public Transit for the Niagara Frontier NFTA Transit Authority. He oversees all the surface transportation operations and work in that department. He was previously the Executive Director of Niagara International Transportation Technology Coalition, or NITEC, which is an international group of organizations here on the border that coordinate mostly traffic on the roads and the bridges across to Canada. He has a professional career, has over 20 years working in transportation consulting in both international and regional projects, involve all aspects of the work, from design, construction, management, and so forth. He is a licensed New York State professional engineer with a bachelor's degree in engineering from Michigan Technology University in civil engineering. And Hal is the Hal Morris, Executive Director of the GBNRTC, the Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council. I think I got that right. He's responsible for guiding metropolitan transportation planning process with here in Buffalo Niagara region in New York State, focusing on integrated multimodal projects within the transportation realm. He oversees all of the federal money that comes into this area, and it goes through his organization to the NFTA counties and cities and so forth that are actually doing the projects. He was a planning director in New York State and in Michigan for regional planning. He has both bachelor and master's degrees from University of New York at Buffalo, and he is professionally certified as a project management professional, or PMP. And those are our two panelists. I will go through first, and I'll go through the presentation, and then we'll open it to our panelists for comment and then to questions and answers. If I can get this to work. It was working before. Let's see. I guess I have to actually click on it to make it go. Okay. We're really at a very unique point in time. It's wonderful to be here. For the first time, we've got federal support for infrastructure investment, bipartisan support in Congress. There seems to be some agreement that they want to make some investments in transportation and infrastructure more generally. And the bills that have been proposed and discussed and kind of agreed to have said that they need to, any investments we make need to address equity disparities. And that really means public transportation needs to be an important part of it. We're also at a point in our history where we're facing a climate crisis. And again, we need to find ways to get people out of their cars, because most of the problems, and I'll show you in some charts later, at least in Western New York, are from cars. And then there's been a lot of work and experience in showing how public transportation investments actually lead to economic growth, and I'll go through those some of those as we go through. Okay, overview of my talk is I'm going to give an overview of our vision, CRT's vision for transit in Buffalo Niagara, talk about the economic arguments, talk about an opportunity we have with our waterfront, our regional waterfront between Buffalo and Niagara Falls, very briefly, but I will show a couple of charts on that. Again, transit and the environment and the importance of transit for dealing with the environment. Mobility justice, that's the equity issue. And we've got some thoughts on that I'll share. And then in the end, I'll just share where we see public support for moving forward with these projects and issues. Okay, first, our vision for transit in Buffalo Niagara. This is our chart from our website and from our brochure. The map is basically the original plan for the light rail system. It was never fully developed. Our goal, one of our major goals, is to see it fully developed. We're thrilled that it's starting to be extended to Amherst, but we would like to see the full system developed eventually. And as you can see from the pictures on the side of the chart, connecting all of the important locations, people draws throughout the Western New York region. I guess I have to, oh, there we are. But light rail doesn't work well alone. It's got a lot of strengths. It carries a lot of people. It's high capacity. It moves fast. It can carry about 4,000 people per hour. It's on a dedicated right of way. In contrast to buses, which are smaller, more local, carrying 50 passengers per bus, about 300 passengers per hour, just a little under 2,000 people across 6 routes. So if you have people on six different routes, you can carry in quite a few people, and that becomes an issue. We're talking about getting rid of the Kensington Expressway, and you really need some horsepower to be able to carry the people that are currently in the 60+ thousand cars that drive on on the Kensington every day. And I'll just note here too, that if you look at light rail and the bus network here that the NFTA operates, that the light rail carries 23% of the load. It's a 6-mile run compared to the hundreds of bus routes that are out there. It's carrying 23% of the entire load. It's a very powerful engine for moving people, and if we can make it extended to the rest of the region, it would be the spine for moving people quickly and fast, and a lot of people to destinations throughout the region, then connecting to bus. And the bus part is important to make the whole system work. Buses need to be frequent and connect the light rail to go to more local destinations. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're thrilled to see that the Amherst extension is actually beginning the engineering design. We've been promoting that for decades, literally. Started back in the 80s and we're working to try to get that, and now is the time, and it's happening, and we're very thrilled to see that actually in engineering design at this point in time. Tom may want to talk more about that later. The other extension, which is also right now in construction, which is also exciting, is that the light rail is being extended just less than a mile into the old DL&W train shed, which is NFTA has always had that as a place where they were doing their maintenance, but now it's going to actually be a station. Some of the pictures here are from the NFTA and some of the other government websites, and you can see they're going to be really beautiful, and the actual construction is underway on that. And I think that's going to actually open in a few years, like 2022, 2023 timeframe. And Tom can probably tell us a little more about that. The ultimate design for that will be to have a walkway connecting the DL&W to the Sabres or the Key Bank Center at Sabres Arena. So when you go to Sabres game, you'll have an indoor exit from the light rail and an indoor walkway into the arena to the Sabres game, which is going to be kind of exciting. The other reason that we're excited about, especially excited about the DL&W, is that it is the first step towards extending the light rail into the east side and then ultimately up to the airport. This is our concept for that, and we're hoping and expecting that we can make some progress on that eventually as they move forward. In fact, what we see is if you look at this is, I'm not going to go through the detail on this, but it's on our website. All this is on our website with the details, including our estimated costs for these various jobs and so forth. Once after the Amherst extension and DL&W is finished, we would like to see the East Side Airport extension construction started, which means we need to start doing some of the studies now, and then similarly some of the studies for the South Towns extensions. Again, they were part of the original plan, and if we can get some of the studies going while we're doing the work on the other two extensions, we can get a head start, and this can be a continuous project. I know that Tim Kennedy has been pushing and trying to find funding to allow the NFTA to do a study of those other extensions. And I know that the NFTA, we're very pleased, has put those studies for the East Side and South Town extensions in their long-range plan. So it's now in the plan, and we just need to get the funding and get it on the schedule to get it done. But this is what we ultimately want to do, and if we can keep things moving, we can have the whole system built by 2035 or so. At least that's our dream, at least. Some of the economic arguments, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I'm just going to mention them. These are some bullet points from the APA, the American Public Transit Association, and they've got a bunch of websites. I've got some websites listed here, so you can go in and look at the details. But they have data that shows that every $1 billion invested creates 50,000 jobs as in transit. The dollar invested creates $5 in economic returns. According to them, transit investments are more have better generate more, positive economic results than roads and bridges do. And then of course it connects people to jobs, which has an economic plus up, and it reduces congestion, pollution, and so forth. Also, long-term economic issues with those. So those are the benefits economically. And the other thing I want to mention here, and this is sort of a new buzzword, but it's all part of investing in transit, but it's this transit-oriented development, which has been found to stimulate economic growth where it's been used. It works when you have high capacity transit, especially high capacity like light rail or bus rapid transit. Even regular transit can work, but it's more likely for higher density transit deployments. When that is coupled with the types of zoning changes that allow for mixed use in that part of the city, a higher density than would typically be allowed as a pedestrian and orientation, multiple transit modes, reduction in parking requirements, and high quality design. And also where it's been used, it reverses disinvestment. For example, the Cleveland Health Line, went through a poor neighborhood, and they actually turned it around, and it became a very high functioning, much better neighborhood after that. And I'll talk about, I know there's always a concern about gentrification and pushing people out, and there are things that can be done and are being done, I think, in Buffalo to fight against that. So when you couple it with those things, you really don't have the problem of that. The NFTA with the GBNRTC did a study of the Amherst extension looking at projected transit-oriented development benefits. And you can see here, I know it's a pretty busy chart, but if you look on the right, the projected growth has, and along all segments, has employment growth and significant population growth in the city itself. There's a reference at the bottom. It's a very good report. It also did a lot of outreach to the community and got ideas for specific stations and how transit-oriented development would work around Amherst or LaSalle or Allen Street Station, or several of the stations. And there were some good ideas in there that came out of those working groups. And another thing, in just in terms of transit, one of the things that's happening now is that businesses are really looking for cities that have good public transportation where they want to move. And the best example of that was the recent Amazon HQ2 RFP, where they stated as a core preference, access to mass transit, direct access to rail, train, subway, metro, bus routes. Now, Buffalo needs to be one of those cities if we want to attract companies and businesses to come here moving forward in the future. And the another thing is just looking at, connecting with airports. This is just an example, a chart of the cities in the US that have connected their inner cities to their airports with light or heavy rail. And this is kind of impressive. I remember when I was still working there, I did a lot of traveling, and most of these cities were not connected to their airports. And we ended up having to rent cars and so forth. And this list is growing. And we'd like to see Buffalo added to this list. And just a quick note on that, if you look at that airport alignment, the map that I showed, those are existing publicly owned rights of way. So getting our light rail through the east side to the airport is a very affordable prospect for us, unlike a lot of other cities. And for example, Los Angeles, I don't think they've done it yet. They've been trying to get it to their airport, and I think they're still a half mile away, and they've got shuttles that they do, but it's an issue. I mentioned that the transit can also stimulate equitable development, and the issue of gentrification is a real issue that needs to be thought through, but it can be mitigated, and it has been. I think the East Side Avenues initiative is a good example. Where there's a lot of affordable housing going up there, and that's going to be a very transit focused area. So if you do it right, if we do it right, we can have the systems developed in a way that promote the building of affordable housing. And of course, by providing good public transportation and rapid public transportation provides amenities, connections to amenities throughout the region, to education, employment, healthcare, and so forth. So that's another benefit. I want to say a quick word about sprawl, because it's an issue here, it's an issue everywhere in this country. The charts on the left are from the One Region Forward report that Hal's group kind of led the effort on. And you can just see on the progressive maps there that we have grown a lot since 1970 in Buffalo. At the same time, while we lost population, we grew, our land use grew by 78%, but we actually lost population. That makes it very difficult to have an effective and efficient public transportation system because you got so much area to cover. And so we really agree with the approach the NFTA is promoting, where you put the best and the very efficient and effective public transportation in the core parts of the city and along high volume corridors, and then you have park and rides that serve the areas out to the further out areas, along with bus service to places where you have major destinations like hospitals and cities like Lockport and so forth. But other than that, you'd have the park and rides that would serve that. They work in other places, and they'll work here too as we extend our light rail. Okay, and a couple of quick words on one of our real opportunities here, and that's our waterfront. This was a study that the Buffalo News did back in 2013. They interviewed people. It was sort of informal, but they interviewed people who were visiting the falls, tourists, and they said, "What did you think of our falls in our city and so forth?" And they said, "It's great, but there's not much to do here." Well, we say, "Oh, this changed automatically." Okay, I guess. So anyway, we disagree with that, and we really have a great waterfront if we connect it. And the green line on the left is the trolley that goes from Niagara Falls up to Fort Niagara. That was something we were promoting for many years. We were thrilled when they finally implemented it, and now they actually have operational funding for keeping it going and have extended it. This year, it's being extended to Lockport. So tourists, when they come to Niagara Falls, they'll have the chance to get up to the Fort Niagara and out to Lockport and see the Erie Canal. Maybe take a canal boat ride on the canal. We would like to see that extended to Buffalo as well, and have a stop at the Tonawondas, and then be able to have visitors attend the things we have here in Buffalo for tourists to see. If you compare this to what they do in Disney World. In Disney World, they've got all the different parks. They're very well attended, but they're connected by transit. They're marketed as a package. So people, when they sign up to go to Disney World, they say, "Yeah, I want to see Epcot, I want to see the Magic Kingdom," and so forth. They check off all the boxes, and then they spend a week or two doing all that. We'd like to see the same thing happen here. If we can market our waterfront as a regional tourist destination. Oop. Okay, a few words about transit and the environment. I don't need to spend much time on this. Global warming is real. This is just a couple of examples, some reports that are out there. You've probably seen some of these charts. It's very frightening, and we really have to do something about it. And it's really not fair if we don't, because we're really burdening future generations. I don't know why this is going by itself. Okay, we're very happy to see that the Erie County has taken a step to commit to meeting the Paris climate goals, which means 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2025, and to, as part of that, incentivize public transportation. as part of that effort, they've been working on it for a while now. They did a survey of the sources of greenhouse gases in Erie County. And you can see them laid out here. And the left bar is in 2005, and then 2014. We've made some progress. We've reduced by 12%. But if you can see, the biggest sector contributing to greenhouse gases is transportation, and we've made very little progress in that. So we feel we need to do that, and public transportation needs to play a role in making that happen. And this is just a chart. I know that the labels on the chart are kind of hard to read, so you can see the different sectors that are included in the sources of greenhouse gases. Then moving beyond that, New York State has passed into law at this point. Governor Cuomo has signed it. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CPCPA. And it actually makes some bolder requirements for reducing our greenhouse gases. 40% emissions reduction by 2030, 85 by 2050. This means we've got to deal with our transportation sector. We've got to get people out of their cars. And one of the things that this law requires is that 30 to 40% of the benefits for any investments made go to historically disadvantaged communities. Again, that means public transportation. One of the things we've been pushing for, I'm just going to mention here, I don't have a chart on it, but we're hoping that New York State will actually sign on to the TCI, the Transportation and Climate Initiative. It's a 12-state program that would put a price on carbon across the 12 eastern states, going from Maine down to Virginia. Several other states have signed on already. New York State has not yet. We're hoping that they will. That will provide a constant revenue stream that could be used for public transportation. So one of the things we've been working on with PPG is to try to make that happen. And then if you take the inventory, the greenhouse gas inventory that I presented for the Erie County did for the climate, the Paris Accord goals, and map those against the New York State CLCPA, you can see that we've got to do even more. We've got to reduce from another 32% by 2030 and another 45% beyond that by 2050. So we really have to get serious about our transportation sector and how we move. And if you look at the different modes, and this is a chart that I got from the Federal Transit Agency, I think the FTA, at least the federal government, DOT. And it maps in, you can see that pounds of CO2 by cars compared with public transportation. Public transportation does a lot better, especially for single occupancy vehicles, or SOVs. It's a big difference. And 85% of the cars on our roads are single occupancy. So we need to change that. One of the things that I want to mention is that if you look on the yellow bar under light rail, our light rail is 60% fueled by hydropower from Niagara Falls hydro stations. So basically, that is zero carbon associated with that energy, and so our light rail is even better than what is typical for light rails across the country. And I'll mention as well that the NFTA is now in the process of electrifying their buses. They're buying electric buses, so they will have the same benefits. In the case of buses, according to Columbia University study, it's 84% less greenhouse gases with electric buses. But it's even better than that. If you look at this chart, whenever we take a trip, anytime, we can choose to take transit. So if we choose to take transit, we add essentially zero additional greenhouse gases to a bus or a train that's already in service. But we avoid, all of the pollution that would otherwise have been generated if we decided to take the car. and what we've done, if we don't change things, this is the status quo. This is what we have in Buffalo now. We have basically if you look at the map on the right, that's our waterfront. When you zoom out, our downtown is basically a parking lot. The red on this chart is surface parking. Green is parking ramps, and at Harbor Places, you've got a parking ramp within it as well. And then the I-190 also becomes a parking lot a lot of the time, causing lots of problems. So, it's a probably a big problem. We need to change the way we move around. Now, what if we all buy electric cars? Won't that solve the problem? Not exactly. We're still going to have congestion. You're going to have congestion, and we're still going to have huge parking demand throughout our city, and lots of parking requirements in the city. We will also still have 4 billion tires a year landfill. They're stockpiled. We'll still have demand for roads. Every ton of cement generates a ton of CO2, and I don't think they've really figured out a way to do it a different way. I know there's some research being done on that, but right now that's the problem. Every ton of steel generates almost 2 tons of CO2. And 50% of cars by volume are plastic, which then has to be dealt with as well. So there's lots of problems with all the cars beyond just greenhouse gases come out of tailpipes. And also, we go into electric vehicles. There's issues with lithium batteries. There's lots of pollution issues, water pollution that comes out of those. There's some child labor issues, and I've got a couple of references here where you can get more detail on some of these problems. And so far, not a single car manufacturer has made the human risks clear and where they're sourcing their lithium batteries. And of course, this applies to buses as well. But the light rail gets its power directly from the grid. So for light rail, which carries the bulk of passengers, we don't have those issues. Another thing that has been raised is the idea of, well, we can just do car hailing. We don't have to drive, we don't have to own cars. We'll just get an Uber or a Lyft. This is a study that was done, and I've got the reference here, so you can go on our website, you can go in and you can read it. It's a very good article. It's got a lot of detail about behaviors and so forth. But you can see here that non-pooled ride hailing, the Ubers, actually generate more emissions than just driving a car because of all of the deadheading, all the getting to and from the customers. Even if you have pooled ride hailing, it's only equal to private vehicles. Buses are better. Rail is a lot better. Although you can see on the right chart, when you use ride hailing in conjunction with rail, we do pretty good. It's a pretty good option, it looks like, for first mile, last mile problems and getting to rail. You can use it for buses as well, although that just brings you right back up to the private car almost. But there is some real opportunity there. And the math on this is pretty simple. A 4-car train can carry 600 people. It can squeeze more than that for a Sabres game or something like that, but 600 people. And that compares to 12 buses and anywhere between 150 and 600 cars, and I've showed 250 here. So this is every 10 minutes in each direction of service. We're taking this many cars off the road. We need to move to public transportation, and especially to light rail, which can carry the heaviest load. And again, every 10 minutes is that's taken off. That's many cars is taken off of the road, and that reduces the demand for parking, the requirement for repaving and maintenance on roads and bridges and so forth. So we just need to find a better way to move around. Okay, mobility justice. This really relates to the equity issue that I mentioned earlier. Basically, what mobility justice is making sure transportation systems and policies satisfy the needs of the most economically most vulnerable. And we know that in Buffalo, Niagara, 30% of households don't own cars, and they rely on public transportation to access jobs, medical appointments, and so forth. The problem is that transit is plagued by poor and infrequent service. This is not a dig on the NFTA, actually. Let me say that, because I think the NFTA, we think the NFTA actually does a pretty good job with the budget they have. I go to all of their meetings, all of their board meetings, and I watch them struggle with budgets and trying to triage the projects that need to be done. We need to have better funding for public transportation. And if we don't, it becomes a service of last resort. I want to give a shout out, a thank you to our Western New York senators and assemblymen, especially Tim Kennedy, who a couple of years ago now actually passed a bill that got $100 million over a 5-year period. I think the first 2 payments have been provided to help the NFTA catch up with all of the light rail maintenance that had been postponed and postponed and postponed. If you go into the light rail system stations now, you'd be pleased to see new escalators, for example. That's just an example of some of the benefits of that funding provided by Tim Kennedy and the other senators and assembly persons, but more is needed. I show the pictures on the bottom here. These are, if you question whether we have spent enough to make our transit system really user friendly and optimal, look at these. These are a couple of transit stops. The one on the left, that's the one where I catch the 34 there all the time. And as you can see, there's not even a bench, let alone any protection from the weather. We're not talking about an expensive monorail system here. We're talking about something to keep you out of the weather while you're waiting for the bus to come. It's very affordable, relatively. And I know I'm very pleased, actually, that the NFTA now has a program, and they are in the process of expanding the number of shelters that they put out there. I'm hoping we get one here on Niagara Falls Boulevard eventually. And I think Niagara Falls Boulevard is a good place for just in terms of there's like 40,000 cars that go up and down Niagara Falls Boulevard every day. So there's some real possibility of having advertising revenue generated by those stations that probably pay for the upkeep of those stations, at least if not the part of the purchase cost. So anyway, we need to do better. And we need more money to make it happen. Another thing I want to just point out in terms of mobility justice, this was a study that was done by the Partnership for the Public Good. Very good study, and the references here, I encourage you to take a look. But they looked at the map on the left. Residents tend to live in some places, and then on the middle and the right are major employment areas. And then they went and they evaluated how long it takes to get from the areas of poverty to the major and minor employment areas. And this is just an example from some employers in the major employment areas. And you can see when you compare public transit to driving, it takes more than 2 times as long, at least for these examples, to get to where you're going. It's not so bad for employers going downtown Buffalo, but for these employers that are out in the suburbish, that's a real problem. So it's not a difficult problem to fix if we can have more buses, more frequent buses, which requires more budget for the NFTA, and then also have light rail for the faster long distance travel. We can make it each more doable. And I want to point out that transit is a life critical service for those who depend on it. I take the bus all the time, but I do have a car, and if I need it, I can always drive. But if for the 30% of Buffalo residents who don't own a car, they have to rely on public transit, and they depend on it. So we need to do better. Another injustice that And I thank Jim for adding this chart. I had forgotten to put it in. We had talked about it. But one of the problems we have, and maybe Hal can talk more about this, but the states and governments are forced to eventually effectively pay a 30% penalty for transit projects compared to highway projects. Highway projects get federal funding with an 80-20 split, 80 federal, 20 local, where transit projects is usually 50-50. It can vary a little bit, but it's usually in the 50-50 range. So basically, we're putting a penalty on transit projects before we even start them. And the hardest part to make happen, of course, is the local match on some of these projects. They're very expensive projects quite often. And this is just a graphic showing the 80-20 disadvantage of public transit. This is the 80% versus 20 federal or local share that goes on to highways, but it's 50-50 for transit. Okay, let me finish up with a question of public support for all of our ideas here. We have a petition that we've been working on. We missed last year because of the virus, but we've before that we've been going around and trying to get supporters. The petition calls for three things. One, extending metro rail along high demand corridors, providing intermodal connectivity, and most importantly, establishing long-term sustainable transit funding. And you can see we've got a lot of cities, city mayors, town and city villages, councils have signed it. Erie County Executive Mark Poloncarz has signed it. So we do have strong support for investing in public transit here in Western New York. And similarly, our petition is sent out to lots of organizations, and you can see the list here. We've got Partnership for the Public Good, Buffalo Urban League, Sierra Club, Voice Buffalo, Push Buffalo, Client Health, Doug Jamel of Douglas Development Corporation, Go Bike Buffalo, Carmina Woods, Simonelli Real Estate, and others. I mean, you can see the list here of organizations. Catholic Charities is a lot of them listed here. But there is support. 15 business leaders and 56 community organizations so far have signed our petition for a transit revolution. And then again, if you look at the work that Hal and the NFTA did on the One Region Forward effort, which was led by, again, GBNRTC with the UB Regional Institute and the Buffalo Niagara Partnership. And they looked at a lot of things. It's not just transportation. There was transportation, there was housing, there was land use, and a lot of issues that they dealt with. But on the transportation issue, they had a lot of workshops. You can kind of see on the right here, when they said, what should we do for transportation? Everyone said we need public transportation. We need to expand light rail, and so forth. And then they said, where should we be investing our money? And you can say clearly, it is investing in making it easier to take transit. So there is support at the political level, and there is support at the public level, the community level. Let's see where. I got a chart that's missing here. Let me just mention. I don't know why it must have gotten left out. There's and I'll have it in when I post these charts. This in 2020, there were, I believe the number was 53 ballot initiatives for raising taxes to improve public transportation. 47 of them passed, so 90% of those passes. So basically, in the list, I wish I could have this chart. It'll be on the website when we post these. It's very impressive. It's the cities that have said, please raise our taxes so we can have better public transportation. We need to have better public transportation in Buffalo as well, and Niagara Falls as well. And we need to find a way to pay for it. The state is stepping up and needs to do more. Hopefully the feds will do more as well. And like I said earlier, we're hoping we can find some ongoing revenues, maybe a carbon tax or something like that to help with the operations, because if we don't, we're going to be falling behind these other regions that are asking get tasks to improve their transit. Just in conclusion, we need to connect our region with public transit. This is the map on the left is the one I showed earlier with the original light rail plan. We actually have an Amtrak connection that goes between Buffalo and Niagara Falls now, and that Amtrak actually goes to Toronto. Oop. I guess it won't stay. So, and you can look at the satellite view there. Basically, if you look at this whole region, Buffalo and Toronto, Hamilton, Buffalo, Niagara, and this was from an article that the data from an article by Dottie Gallagher and her cohorts or parallel organizations in Ontario. It was another voice article. It was just in the Buffalo News a couple of days ago on the 11th. And they point out that the population of this region is 8 million people, GDP of $400 billion. Canada's impact on Western New York is $900 million a year. We need to get those borders open, and we need to make it passable by transit as well. But we'd love to see the Toronto GO train, their regional rail, now goes to Niagara Falls, Ontario. It's just across the bridge from Niagara Falls, New York. We'd love to see it get across there. I know there's been some work done on overcoming some of the obstacles for the customs across the bridge for trains and for everybody. So we want to see that happen. And we'd love to see some commuter rail or some regional rail connecting Niagara Falls and Buffalo, or at least in the near term, some kind of a transit connectivity there. And that is what I have to present. And why don't I turn it open to Hal and Tom, if you have any comments. Hal, you want to go first? I think you're muted.
Sorry, I muted because I had to sneeze before. Pollen season. Yeah, very comprehensive. You got a lot of good facts in there. Well identified the problem. Now we need to talk about where we're going, how we're going to make some changes. Some of the things you talked about, very true. Economic growth impacts, and we had substantial research on that in the first phase of the transit-oriented development program, and it was pretty significant where it showed that while we don't have much growth in the region we have a lot of young people. By 2040, 28% of the regional jobs will be in that metro rail corridor, which could add an assessed value of about $1.7 billion or more, which, when you look at that, strengthens the tax base of local governments. And we always wonder, can the federal government and the state government somehow bail us out? Somehow we also need to grow some local resources to be able to support public transit, which turns around and again offers greater job access and economic potential. In one region forward, again, if you get to the economics, we looked at the cost of sprawl, and it seems like, well, okay, so you had some new homes and that generated some new tax base, but in reality, if you're not having growth, you're moving people around, and every time you grow in an area that's previously undeveloped, then you have to build new infrastructure, which means an expense to build the infrastructure. Plus, you need to maintain that new infrastructure as well as maintain the old infrastructure. So you wind up overpaying for what you get in terms of infrastructure for transportation, and that detracts from your ability to spend on the things that you really need. There was you talked a lot about some of the how you then do the connectivity, and we've been looking at transit-oriented development, obviously, and making sure that it's going to be strong to support the emerging light rail network. And how then do you connect those stations to the surrounding community so there is good access? And some of that's in just building more and stronger connections to the nearby community, including, and we're working on it now, it's like certainly the walk function, bike, other types of modes. we look at some micro-mobility opportunities in there that would make access to the light rail as the spine you mentioned much easier. So, and I'm a believer in AV and autonomous vehicles and other technologies eventually being a significant part of the solution to transportation mobility. But in the interim, and it may be quite a while, there is obviously the existing transportation system that, if well funded, would serve us well. And I saw an article in New Republic recently, and it was titled just fund the buses. And they talked about all the research and opportunities we talk about in different kind of technologies, clearly important, but bicycles, sidewalks, public transportation really works exceedingly well. They're known quantities that can be strengthened. They're safe and enhance the urban experience. So sometimes you just need to put it right in there and make sure our system works really well for what we have. We didn't talk much about the pandemic, and it gave us some interesting examples of how we were affected and how we responded. And I was on Wall Street Journal's Future of Everything session today, and at noon, the Attorney General Vivek Murthy was on, and he talked about during the pandemic how access and to healthcare was so critical. Those that didn't have access were obviously impacted to a much greater extent. But I also talked about it's not just the pandemic, but overall healthy living. So constant access to healthcare, constant access to healthy food. If you are transit dependent, as your graphics show, your whole life is consumed with how to move about, how to access things like healthcare, employment, food acquisition, things of that nature. So, I think that was certainly highlighted during the pandemic and needs to find some collective solutions. During the pandemic too, I was looking in Bloomberg City Labs recently, and they have some good articles. They were talking about how Detroit came out of it, obviously significantly impacted by the pandemic, but it's like a lot of things. They immediately changed and they found ways to reinvent themselves, and they forced the local governments in the Detroit Metro to create decentralized systems for testing, treatment, vaccine distribution, things that you would have never imagined could have happened years ago. It was sort of like where all of a sudden we talked about work from home, and with the snap of a finger in 1 week, people were working from home. All the things we said could never happen, but they really can. And if you look at then, again, back in Detroit, not only did they centralize and find different ways of doing things, but they got the partnerships together and they reimagined themselves, recalibrated. So they brought together philanthropic institutions, nonprofit, public leaders to a new working relationships that found ways to get it done, collaborate on finance, and even take on some of the land use challenges and remediation, and again, make public transportation work. So there's a lot we can do. You talked about the mega region strengthening our economy. Well, the Golden Horseshoe, we worked with United States DOT and got that identified as a mega region. And we've identified ways to make that connectivity better. And there's near-term issues, obviously, with the border, but longer term, it's all about transportation. Again, how we can move and integrate our economies for greater strength in Western New York. Many things going on. You mentioned many. Yes, there are opportunities, as indicated in the new federal government. So far, there's been no consensus on how to go forward. And what we need to do is, again, get to good plans, identify the right projects, continue to pursue them. We talked about a comprehensive plan in there. Yeah, clearly. So we need to identify step by step what has to happen, stay focused on that. One thing we do in Western New York is kind of jump around from project to project. And in the end of the day, then we never get focused on one and get it done. So again, comprehensive plan, attract resources from all levels, change the funding structures, grow our own resources, and get some of these done. So thank you.
Okay, yeah. Real quick comment on the transit development experience. I just want to say I'm very pleased to see that we do have a lot of the developments that we've seen along the light rail is affordable housing. It's not all market rate, so it's not going to be having a lot of gentrification. And the other thing you mentioned, the COVID experience from last year. The other thing we learned from that is that transit riders are essential workers.
Oh, yeah.
So we learned that if we don't have transit, we don't have essential workers. So
Without a doubt.
another point.
Yeah, and that's affordable housing is a significant component of the TOD study, and the possibility of maybe attracting some financial resources and creating a TOD fund to make that happen too is part of the program.
We'll give Tom a chance. Do you want to have say a few words, Tom?
Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to thank Citizens for Region Transit for this opportunity tonight and for your position and the outreach that you do. It's certainly pleased and welcome. You guys are tough to follow, but a couple thoughts that come to mind. It's really an exciting time for transit. We as an organization and we as an industry are rolling out, a lot of new things, whether it's fare collection or battery electric buses, zero emission buses. There's a lot of things going on. We're talking in our area. We're working on joint development to really leverage some of the investment that's been made in light rail. But as exciting and as great as it is with all the opportunities we see, there's still those challenges out there. We really are looking at what does the new demographic look like. We see the cities changing. Going back 4 or 5 years ago, moving to the city and the urbanization was really something that was gaining a lot of steam. And, sprawl has always been a big enemy of transit. It's really been a big challenge for us as people move out. So the urbanization was something we were excited about. And now we're seeing that change again. And we don't know what that impact is going to be. The work from home, the telecommuting, the teleeducation, all of these pieces are having real impacts on the transit industry. We've been involved in a lot of discussions, and we're forecasting at this point in time getting our ridership back to 90% of where it was in 2019. So we're challenged to know when or if we'll ever really get back to where we'll be, because we really don't know what that looks like. So what we're trying to do is reinvest and reinvest and reinvent ourselves as transit providers, using some of the products and some of the tools we talk about. And with a focus on mobility as a whole, the comprehensive approach that Hal talked about, I think is key, because transit doesn't work on its own, right? And we really have to have options for people for the first mile, last mile, and for those folks that are looking at, still wanting to do some sort of sprawl, because as much as we'd like everybody to live in the urbanized area, that's not necessarily going to happen. So in the changing environment, a lot of it was facilitated by the pandemic. We're going to grow and learn. But once again, I think that as an agency and as an industry, we're looking at the new models to help with that discussion, whether it's micro transit, whether it's more investment in heavy transit on the corridors that are really transit dependent and really can leverage transit to do economic development. That's where we need to focus our energy, putting the right models with the right mobility options together in a community to allow us to prosper. I like the fact that, we're not growing, but we're getting younger. So maybe that does say we'll grow. I talked to a gentleman today from Phoenix, and he talked about how wonderful it was there and how it's growing. But we talked about water, and we talked about the Great Lakes. And is that the impetus for our region and other regions around here really to prosper in the future? So I think it is, and I think we need to be prepared for that. We need to invest. Again, I'd like to just thank you and your organization for your support. Funding is great, and it's really kind of the key to everything, but sustainable and predictable funding is really the key. As an organization, we can move and adapt as funding comes and goes, but the key is that we know it's going to be there. When we talk about service, we talk about fund the buses, we talk about frequencies, which is really the key, span of service frequency. those are really critical pieces in order for us to be a good provider of service. That has to be a sustainable model that we know that we can rely on. The example is if we expand our service, the buses are really the key to that, or the light rail. A light rail vehicle today costs $4 to $5 million. A battery electric bus, by the time you get putting the charging infrastructure in, is on the order of magnitude of 1.25 million per vehicle. So these are real investments, and in order to expand and provide those services to a community, that funding has to be sustainable and predictable. So with that, I just want to again thank you for this great opportunity tonight. And if there's questions, I think it's be an honor to answer those if we can.
Thank you, Tom. And Ricky, why don't you go ahead and I'll let you lead the question and answer, and I guess the three of us will answer as appropriate.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to lift up some of the comments too before I pose the questions. I'd say that most folks were chiming in when Hal was talking about just fund the buses, really applauding all of the things he had mentioned about that sort of article. And then another thing that folks were really chiming in on was shifting the focus less on the types of modes of transportation to the people who are using them, and how that sort of shifts the narrative of what it is that is talked about and is trying to be done in a region. And a lot of folks were agreeing with that. So just wanted to lift up a couple of those comments before diving into some of the questions. Doug, I think you answered the first question, but logistically just wanted to see if the presentation will be shared with attendees, and where folks might be able to find it once it is.
I'll just say we will have the view graphs, including the one that got omitted by mistake, on our website within the next day or so. And this meeting was recorded, and it will be put on YouTube, and there'll be a link to that on our website as well. And Ricky, you would know when it's going to be on YouTube. I don't know, but PPG is doing that for us.
Yep, that will be by the end of the day on Monday.
Okay, perfect.
Great. So a question from Rose: will the East Side extension include connection to the central terminal in the Broadway area?
Well, let me answer that. If we have anything to say about it, the answer is yes. And the central terminal is coming back. There's a lot of things happening there now. It's becoming a sort of mini destination, and the light rail or the right of way that the light rail will use goes right by there. And it's a community that actually needs better transit service, or needs good transit service. So we think it makes a lot of sense to have the light rails have a stop at the central terminal. In fact, our position is that eventually the Amtrak station out in Depew, which is basically in the middle of nowhere, you can't get there by bus. I mean, it's very difficult too. There is one that goes there, but it's very difficult. Many transfers, several transfers. And we would like to see eventually, as the central terminal comes back and becomes, a usable building again, to have that also become an Amtrak station and make that Buffalo's main grand station, and get rid of that thing out in Depew. That's our position.
I could add on to that a little bit, Doug. Obviously, there is no extension planned at this point in time. We've been doing planning studies for East Side extension for years. There's many of them in our files here. I will say this though, if you look at scoring for transit extensions and the availability of federal funding, a couple of things are really important. Economic development and ridership are two keys. And running through the East Side really helps, identify those as key, and really creates, I think, the impetus for a successful project. So obviously, any kind of redevelopment and critical mass that occurs at the central terminal, the fact that it is there and along that alignment really makes it kind of a common sense approach to what would occur if we were to go in that direction. So I think there's a real common sense approach behind that being a viable alternative for transit if it were extended in that direction.
Yeah, I would just mention that the plans that you have done use that alignment. So the alignments that you have studied in the past go by there. The most recent one was in 2010, and that study found that the Amherst extension had the biggest bang for the buck in terms of ridership, but the east side and airport had the biggest bang for economic development, so potential. So I think there's a lot of reasons to want to do that.
Great. Another question from earlier in the presentation. Are park and rides effective? Isn't NFTA Metro eliminating its park and rides? I feel like other transit authorities has been doing that as of late, citing Cleveland as an example.
Well, I can answer part of that question. Park and rides can be effective. Obviously, right now, with the way the urban core is being utilized and the fact that there's much less traffic coming into town, really does impact that. We are in the process of doing public outreach starting in earnest this week and really in the next few weeks looking for input on where people want to go and what kind of services they want. About a year ago, right before the pandemic hit us, we were looking at rolling out new express service. So express service, I don't see it going away. I see it being reinvented. Some of the challenges that we have with our express service is there's not enough of it really for people to make it reliable. So what we're looking to do is identify the higher quality express routes and really to put more service into those routes. So instead of 1 or 2 in and out per day, you may see 4 or 5 in and out per day from those service areas, and really try to reinvest and create some critical mass on the ones that could be more successful than the others. Of course, everything's impacted by the pandemic, but we think that park and rides do make sense, and there is a market for them, and we want to be in that market.
Yeah, just to expand on that, our feeling is that if there's a push now, which we agree with, of getting rid of the Kensington, for example, maybe making it a slow speed parkway, and to do that, now you've got a lot of people that you need to be able to carry in and out of the city, and a light rail with a park and ride can help accomplish that. So that's our position. But you're right, Tom. It depends on how it's designed and marketed and so forth.
Great. One from earlier in the presentation as well. In order for 2035 to be a realistic year at which the East Side project would be completed, when would the study need to be completed by, and what would need to happen to expedite that?
We generally look at these types of major investments, such as a light rail expansion, as a 10-year window. So in earnest, you most likely have to start in 2025 if you wanted to have it complete in 2035. And those are very round numbers. The devil's in the details of community support, political support, funding mechanisms. But generally, I would say we can look at a 10-year horizon on these projects, and Amherst is proven probably to be longer than that. So I would say that's a reasonable planning horizon. I don't know, Hale, maybe you may have some more thoughts from a planning perspective.
If you're just as a comment, as you look at I had that one chart that I showed, and it's going to be on our presentation. You can look at it. It's on our website as well. And we do show it, the study starting, probably 2025. I don't have the chart in front of me, but about that time. And our thought was that it should start at the same time that the Amherst extension is starting to get into construction, because at that point, the cost of a study is really almost trivial compared to the amount of money we're spending on the Amherst extension. I know there's different buckets of money, and it's hard to just say that, but nevertheless, it's a small amount of money relative to what we're actually investing in the Amherst extension, and it will allow us to be able to have a continuous development. Once the Amherst is done, then we can move right into the east side expansion. So that's our position. And yeah, I'm sure you're right, Tom. 10 years or so is the right window we would need to get to the finish, but that's how we would see it.
Great. And you all touched on some of these things, so I'm just going to elaborate on the latter part of this question. But the full question is, since the federal government plans to greatly increase funding for public transit projects, and many people in Western New York want major expressways such as the Skyway, 33, and Ski-Jacqueline Expressway removed, will the NFTA rethink its plans to limit Metro Rail expansion to UB North? And will the agency reconsider expanding along the airport corridor, South Towns corridor, or elsewhere? So I don't know, I think maybe Hal might have a few thoughts on this, and I think Doug had a couple comments on it as well.
Well, yes, there's a number of initiatives that have been identified at the federal level. I was trying to parse through those today, actually, and there's some big numbers on one side, some more modest numbers on the other side, and there's a great disparity in where and how some of that funding would go. You know, it appears that some of it may be counted as what's in the regular transportation authorization anyway. So they're starting to, they're gonna have a bill start working on Monday, I think, that they can look at for the new federal legislation. Whether the stimulus package comes out in infrastructure stimulus in some kind of other form, it's not obvious. You know, the upside, they're talking trillions, and obviously that is not trivial money, and there's no identification of how it would be dispersed either. But it sounds good. We need to, I always talk about, well, yeah, you can wait for interesting money to become available. The best way to get your project funded is to have your project ready, work on your project, get the background work done, and make it attractive enough to be able to draw funding to it. Because if you get great federal money available and your project is not ready, this project's not going to get it.
I'll just say our position is you need both. You know, I mean, that's why we're talking trillions of dollars, because if we agree, we need to get rid of the Kensington and other roads that have destroyed a lot of our cities. That costs a lot of money, but you need to replace it with something, and it's public transportation is the best thing, especially if you're going to have mobility justice and equity be part of the goal that you're trying to satisfy. The problem we've had in the past is that we have built roads, and then people who can afford cars can get places. People who are relying on transit can't get places. So we think that that's one of the reasons we need trillions of dollars, because we need to fix our roads. A lot of bridges are falling down, and we need to make repair or overcome some of the mistakes we made in the past, like the Kensington, and there's other ones as well. But we also need to do the other thing that takes the place of those, and that's public transportation. So we need both, and that's why it's $1 trillion.
So I'd just like to add one thing. You know, we have a lot of conversations about funding for capital projects, whether it's the Tiger program, the new starts, the small starts. There's communities all across our country that are having the same conversation we're having tonight. And there's a lot of competition for this money, regardless of how much is out there. Every community's got a project, and the key, I think, is that we as a community, as a whole, including our elected officials, are all pulling in the same direction and are consistent with our messaging. If there's fragments, if we're not all together, there's a lot of communities that are going to step into those voids. So the competition will be tough for any of the funding that's coming forward, even if it's funding at very high levels. So we have to be prepared. I think Hal's point is key. We've got to be ready with the projects, but we've also got to have everybody supporting them.
Great. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that comment too. We had a couple sort of logistic questions. How is NFTA planning to undo some of the 2020 cuts to bus service? And are there any plans under development to undo some of the 2011 ones?
So as I mentioned earlier, we're just in the process right now of doing outreach to the community. There's some stuff on our website this week. We'll start doing much more heavy push in the next couple weeks, trying to get input for where people want to go, what kind of service they want, what they're looking for. So we're in the process right now of evaluating our service. As I said all along, we don't just replace what was there before. We're always evolving our service to respond to our community. Obviously, Bethlehem Steel is not what it was in the 50s, and Amazon is on Walden Avenue. So we need to really be responsive and put our service where it best belongs today for the needs of our community. So I'd encourage everybody on this call to spread the word on our surveys, to try to give us as much feedback as we can so we can use that data along with all the other data we use here to try to design what our service should look like in the future. So That's really our approach at this point in time, is to try to reinvent ourselves with a service that best suits the community as it exists today and as it's going to look like in the next few years.
And just to expand on that, our position is that we need to improve service which means we need more funding for it. And that's operational funding. We've been supporting the TCI, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is a 12-state effort to put a price on carbon and use that for green things, including public transportation. There's another bill that we have pushed year after year. It doesn't seem to go anywhere, to take away there's a tax that goes on sale of stocks in New York City. I'm not sure exactly, but it gets negated every year. I mean, they don't have to pay that. It's the bill, the law says that doesn't have to be paid. And there's a bill that's been put up to get rid of that law. So basically they have to pay that fee when you buy and sell stock. Those two things would raise a lot of money. They would be predictable because they'd be year after year after year, and they'd be able to be applied operationally. At least that's our position now. And we see that being a possibility because we really, as I said in my presentation, we need to improve public transportation. We need more buses, more frequent buses, as well as light rail. And that's going to mean more money for the NFTA to have more buses and more drivers and so forth. So we want to go in that direction, and we need to find ways to fund it.
Great, thank you. There's a comment and then a question related to it. So in Rochester, DSS, Department of Social Services, gives clients a monthly bus pass in part to help them get around looking for work. From everyone's understanding, in Buffalo, does that happen? Is that something folks are looking at? Would that help boost transit ridership numbers?
We have a strong relationship with Erie County Social Services. They purchase a large number of passes from us on a monthly basis and distribute those in the community as appropriate. So yeah, I believe we have a similar relationship. I'm not familiar with what happens in Rochester or how those are distributed there. But yes, that does exist here in Western New York as well.
And I said you also have a corporate pass program, which I know the county is going to be adopting soon, and other companies as around as well, to get reduced rates for their employees.
And we're actually looking at changing our corporate pass program to be more appealing in the new environment where maybe not everybody's coming to work 5 days a week. So we've got to be nimble and adjust that program so it stays viable and attractive to employers. So we're in the process of looking at that as well.
Great. A question related to that and to one of the slides that Doug had shared earlier. You had said about 18 business leaders signed on to a petition. It sounds like there's a lot of conversations with folks in the private sector. Of course, this is public transit, but is there any talk of investment from any of these corporations directly, or as one of the other presenters had mentioned, from the philanthropic community here in Buffalo?
Yeah, our survey didn't get into that. I mean, we're looking for general support. I don't know if Tom has any information on that.
No, I don't. We do get support from industry when they look for service expansion, and generally we look for that in the form of them buying passes for their employees. And that's, it's a great argument. I'll just take a second, but we talk to employers who don't want to buy passes for their employees, but they're more than willing to pave and salt and plow a parking lot. And we just can't seem to make that connection. It's a battle, even though we present it time and time again. So.
I will say though, that your corporate pass program does require the employer to kick in a portion, and those who have signed up are doing that. So at least they've done that much. And I believe, and Tom, you would know better than me, but that as you put in a new line or a new service, sometimes an employer will actually help with incorporating a bus stop at their site if it's right at their building. I'm not sure, but I think I've seen some of that happen.
Yep, we have. We see investment in shelters and other amenities. And we've got businesses where we're putting real-time information in their buildings and pieces like that. But most of those are preaching to the choir where the transit use is already pretty heavy. But those are the types of relationships we need in order to be successful in the community.
Great. Just reading through the chat, there's a lot of folks, I think, who are really invested both in the work that they do, but also in the work that CRT does. And they're just making a lot of comments on both similar types of cities and what they have done in order to improve public transit or increase the different types and modes of transportation in their areas. But there's also a lot of really great events that are happening that I just wanted to say, if you're not paying attention to the chat, I really encourage you to do that. And we'll provide some of this information afterwards too. But we're coming to the end of our questions. So if you have any burning ones, I encourage you to put them into the chat. We just got one that was earlier this year. The FAA changed its rules about the use of airport funds for building transit lines to airports. Previously, the transit line needed to primarily serve just the airport, but now transit lines that provide more service to the community are also eligible for airport funding. Could that help boost funding here for Metro Rail extension to the airport?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not equipped to answer that. I'm not familiar with the FAA funding piece. Maybe our grants department or our aviation folks could answer that, but I'm not familiar with the changes.
Yeah. Let me say a couple things on that, though. I did have a chart. One of the problems we do have here, we looked into a number of years ago now, doing a ballot initiative here in Western New York, and to see if we could get some, a ballot on the election and get the public to vote to increase some form of taxation to increase public transportation. And we really found out that New York State is very difficult to have ballot initiatives. If you saw the chart that I didn't have, but I described, there's out of 53, there was 47 ballot initiatives throughout the country where they put a ballot on the ballot initiative on, for election, and 90% passed, and the people in that community said, please raise our taxes. And there were different ways of doing that. Sales tax was one of the ways that they did it, and there were some other kind of user fee things as well. And they said, yes, please raise our taxes because we want better public transportation. It's hard to do that in New York because I think it's because we're a home rule state. I'm not sure what the real ins and outs of that are, but we looked into it and we basically said we're not going to go there because it was just too hard to do, in Western New York. But we do need we can do it legislatively, and that was one of the things we've worked on as well. We've had several planks with the PPG over the years and trying to find ways to raise funding, operational funding for transit. One of our ideas was to, I think it was to raise was it the property tax, Betsy? I think it was property tax. But when we met with the county officials, deputy commissioner, I think it just wasn't doable in Western New York. It wasn't property tax.
Yeah, we had talked about a line item on the property tax where you would pay a fee and receive a certain amount of, this would be hand in hand with the smart fare system.
Yeah.
You would actually get something tangible for that mandate. It would work something like the library fee. Right. Whether or not you use it, you pay the fee. But in this case, with the transit fee, you would actually receive a pass with whatever, a certain amount of credit on it. And you could either use that yourself, give it away, sell it on passexchange.com. There are a lot of possibilities. Other parts of the country too, I understand there's talk of taxing vehicle miles traveled so as to discourage too many, unnecessary car trips, let's say. Maybe every year when you have your mandatory car vehicle inspection. You know, the inspector would also be looking at your odometer, and after a certain number of miles that you'd be allowed free, then you would be taxed for all the miles driven beyond that, to give people an incentive to drive less, and of course to help develop a new sustainable source of funding for transit.
So there are ideas out there, and we've been pursuing them, but none of them have gelled yet, but we're going to keep working on it.
Great. There was a quick question and a link in the chat asking whether there was any promotion of New York State's Clean Transportation Prize Competition. It would be great to see at least a few strong applicants and partnerships hailing from Western New York.
I'm not familiar.
Yeah, we're familiar with that. We've been looking at that, trying to see if there's some innovative ways we can support our battery electric bus program. I'm not sure I have anything to offer other than that we're well aware of it and focused on opportunities if they exist. So, yeah.
I think we're in on it too. I just saw the letter today of the application.
Great. So it sounds like that might be a way to, as Doug and others were saying, to get folks together, to have an aligned vision for what it is that people might be interested in, rather than some of these disparate types of things that we're advocating for. There was another question in the chat. A few years ago, some of us viewed a presentation from UB Study looking at TOD around University Station. It was an exciting concept because it suggested the potential to create a kind of Harvard Square for UB South Campus. Is this being studied further, the potential for the Metro Rail extension project to help facilitate this?
In the TOD study, we're looking at 6 potential locations in different parts of the whole corridor. I don't have any specifics on university at this point. But yeah, I watched that project too. Some good ideas by students, and I think it's a good opportunity at that location too, in terms of access, and it kind of also would connect up with our recent Bailey Avenue transit and road study.
Great. Well, I think those were all of the questions that we had in the chat. I think a couple of folks made comments that there are the opportunity to make comments to the MUTCD, and they put some of the links in the chat if folks are interested. And then there's a couple other studies and reports that were linked to based on some of the comments made earlier, like Los Angeles and Chicago having good models for how to enact equitable transit that's centered around community development. So I'll be sure to capture those and send them out to other folks as well. But I wanted to pass it back to Doug, Hal, Tom, to see if you had any closing comments for anybody else.
Well, I would just finish with saying I really enjoyed the session, and I can't thank CRTC and all the associated parties for all the work that you do. It's tough, and a lot of times people don't understand it, but you guys hang in there and keep getting the information out, and that's what we really need.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that, and also say thanks for writing, because I know a lot of you folks are our customers, and we'll try to provide you the best service that we can. But thank you again for your support tonight and for the opportunity.
Yep. And let me finish up by thanking everybody for attending, thanking Cricky and PPG for hosting and doing a great job of helping us with all the questions and sorting all that out in real time for us, and doing the technology side of it for us. Really appreciate it. And again, everyone, thanks for coming, and have a good weekend. It's going to be good weather, I think.
Thank you.
Great. And then watch Monday for the presentation to be posted on YouTube.
Yep.
Thank you.